Welcome to the Inner Essence, a space of mindfulness, spiritual awakening, and reconnecting with your true self. Breath, be present, and begin your journey with it.
Every perception you hold is shaped by a subtle tension, an unseen tremor beneath awareness. It isn't the world that moves against you, it's the frequency through which you watch it. Fear does not simply distort your thoughts, it bends the architecture of what you call real. When you look at life through that pulse of contraction, everything rearranges to confirm the threat. Faces harden, time shortens, the body tightens its borders. Yet beneath that armor, another rhythm waits, unrushed, unharmed, already whole. The turning point begins not when you escape fear, but when you begin to see what it has been doing to your sight all along. You've spent years trying to outrun fear, replacing it with affirmations, disguising it as ambition, drowning it in busyness. Yet fear is patient. It hides not in the shadows of the world, but in the unexamined gestures of your attention. The moment you tighten around discomfort, the moment you interpret uncertainty as danger, it reappears. It doesn't need a reason. It only needs your resistance. Observation, when pure, dissolves resistance. It isn't an act of analysis or strategy. It's a kind of still vision that stops demanding explanations. Most people mistake observation for control, believing that to see fear is to dissect it, to find the cause and remove it. But true awareness doesn't dissect, it illuminates. When light fills a room, darkness doesn't negotiate, it just ceases to exist. Fear has its own intelligence. It's not your enemy. It's the body's way of protecting a perception that feels separate from the whole. Every pulse of fear is a signal that something in you has forgotten its belonging. So when you observe fear consciously, you aren't trying to silence it. You're remembering the part of you that believes it must survive alone. This is the quiet revolution, to look at fear without trying to fix it. At first, this feels like doing nothing, and the mind hates that. It wants to solve, label, and move on. But the mind itself is what fear uses to sustain the illusion of urgency. The more you think about fear, the more real it becomes. The more you see it without dialogue, the more transparent it turns. Picture this: a storm shaking the surface of a lake. The waves look violent, unyielding. Yet beneath, the depths are untouched. Awareness belongs to the depth, not the surface. When you observe fear from that still layer, you start to recognize the difference between movement and essence. Fear may rise and fall, but it doesn't define the water. Try this for a moment. Bring to mind something that recently triggered anxiety, a message unanswered, an uncertain outcome, a silence that felt personal. Notice how quickly the body contracts. The chest narrows, the breath becomes shallow, thought accelerates. Now pause. Instead of analyzing the story behind the fear, observe the sensation of fear itself. The vibration in the gut, the pulse in the throat, the impulse to move away. Observe as though you were watching weather through glass, close enough to feel the light, distant enough not to react. In that observation, something remarkable happens. The narrative that kept the fear alive starts to lose its authority. You see that fear was never demanding your obedience. It was asking for your presence. It wanted to be seen, not solved. Awareness is the nutrient fear has always been starving for. To live from awareness is to become the space in which fear can appear and dissolve without consequence. This doesn't make you fearless, it makes you free. Fear may still visit, but it no longer rearranges your perception. You begin to meet it the way the sky meets clouds, welcoming their movement, yet never mistaking them for itself. The turning point, then, is not a dramatic moment of courage. It's subtle, almost invisible. It happens in the instant you stop running, when you allow fear to be part of the scenery, not the director of the film. In that instant, you exit the hypnotic loop of reaction and enter a deeper kind of seeing. Awareness doesn't fight fear. It reclaims the power you unknowingly gave to it. And that reclamation changes everything. Your breath becomes a bridge between contraction and release. Your thoughts slow down enough for intuition to be heard. Even your relationships begin to shift, because you no longer project the unfinished parts of yourself onto others. Eventually, you realize that observation isn't passive at all. It's creative. What you observe consciously reorganizes its structure around coherence. Fear, being incoherent by nature, can't sustain itself in the light of that coherence. It falls apart, not violently, but gracefully, like a mist disappearing as the sun rises. This is where transformation begins, not through mastery or suppression, but through surrender to the clarity that has always been here. When you stop escaping, fear becomes transparent, and you begin to see what's behind it, pure aliveness, waiting for your permission to breathe freely again. Fear is persuasive because it promises continuity. It whispers that if you stay alert, if you anticipate the next threat, you'll remain safe. That whisper becomes the soundtrack of an entire life built around control. What we call being responsible often hides an unconscious worship of survival, an identity addicted to predicting what could go wrong. The paradox is that this vigilance doesn't preserve life, it suspends it. You've probably felt that endless loop, the sense of waking up already braced for impact, even when nothing is wrong. The nervous system doesn't wait for real danger. It creates it. It keeps replaying unfinished memories, looping through old emotions, not because it enjoys suffering, but because it confuses repetition with safety. Familiar pain feels safer than unknown peace. This is the architecture of the survival mind. It doesn't think in terms of growth or possibility, it thinks in echoes. Every decision filtered through fear repeats a version of the past. That's why similar situations keep appearing. Faces change, but the feeling remains the same. The outer world only mirrors the algorithm of attention. What you keep expecting, consciously or not, you keep summoning. The addiction to survival is subtle because it wears noble disguises. You might call it discipline, caution, or realism. But underneath those names lies the same root vibration: distrust of life. Survival mode cannot imagine surrender, because surrender looks like death to it. So it builds patterns, tight routines, emotional defenses, familiar dramas, to keep itself alive. It would rather repeat the known pain than risk the unknown freedom. The mind, in survival mode, becomes a self-replicating machine. Every fearful thought produces a physical response. Every physical response confirms the fearful thought. The loop feeds itself, sustained by your belief that reacting equals protection. Yet, what if reaction isn't protection at all, but continuation of the very state you wish to escape? Imagine a caged bird that has learned to sing only to the rhythm of footsteps approaching the cage. Its song becomes conditioned by fear, yet it no longer realizes it's singing fear itself. The same happens in us. We learn to express, create, and love from within the structure of tension. Even our joy becomes cautious, our hope measured. That tension becomes the baseline frequency of existence, so familiar we call it normal. Observation begins to break this loop because it introduces a new variable: presence. Presence doesn't try to silence the mechanism, it reveals it. When you watch your own reactions without judgment, you begin to see how automatic they are. You notice how the body leans forward before the mind even decides, how shoulders tighten at the hint of uncertainty, how you plan conversations before they happen to avoid rejection. These are not flaws, they are survival strategies crystallized into personality. There's a quiet grief that comes with realizing how much of your identity was born from defense. It's the grief of seeing how often you traded authenticity for control. But that grief is also the first crack in the cycle. When you stop shaming the mechanism and start witnessing it, something softens. You no longer fight to escape the cage. You begin to understand its construction. The addiction starts to weaken when you give up the fantasy of safety. Real safety isn't the absence of risk, it's the presence of coherence. When your awareness and your body move together, without inner conflict, life stops feeling like an enemy. You begin to act from alignment instead of anticipation. The energy that used to fuel vigilance becomes available for creation. Fear cannot thrive where curiosity lives. The moment you become curious about your reactions, why this tone triggers you, why silence feels dangerous, you introduce light into the circuitry. You begin to see how each reaction is a message from an older version of yourself, still trying to protect you. Awareness doesn't reject those versions, it integrates them. You start to see that your survival patterns were never mistakes, only incomplete attempts at love. This is how the cycle begins to unwind. not through effort but through inclusion. When the observer within you grows larger than the fear that shaped you, the pattern starts losing gravity. The nervous system recalibrates, breath becomes deeper, time expands. The loop begins to dissolve because there's finally something stronger than the instinct to repeat, the recognition that you are safe enough to see. In that space, survival transforms into participation. You are no longer defending life, you are living it. Fear still arises, but it no longer commands. You start moving through the world with a subtle awareness. That continuity was never the goal, coherence was. And coherence is born not from control, but from presence. Fear doesn't always enter loudly. Sometimes it appears as a subtle vibration behind your thoughts, a quiet tension that rearranges your breath before you even notice. It's in that precise instant, so ordinary, so physical, that the real alchemy begins. The body tightens, the mind follows, attention narrows, until life itself feels smaller. Yet in the middle of that contraction, something wordless is also watching. That watcher is the key, the silent presence that fear cannot touch. To dissolve fear, you don't need to rise above it. You need to stop merging with it. Most people live so fused with their reactions that they can't tell the difference between sensation and self. The heart races, and they say, "I'm anxious." The stomach contracts, and they whisper, "I'm unsafe." But the moment you shift from identification to observation, fear loses its mask. You see that it was never you trembling, it was an energy passing through, looking for somewhere to land. This is the subtle art of unlearning ownership. Fear does not belong to anyone. It's a movement of life itself. When it's met with attention, it begins to reveal its intelligence. Fear isn't trying to sabotage you. It's trying to deliver a message that you've been avoiding. The message is always the same. There is still a part of you that believes you are separate from the whole. Every surge of anxiety is that forgotten part calling to be seen. Let yourself feel the wave without building a story around it. Drop the analysis. Don't chase the why, just sense. The body knows how to release what the mind tries to manage. If you stay with the sensation, its shape, its temperature, its rhythm, without trying to fix or name it, you'll notice a strange thing. The wave peaks, softens, and then disappears on its own. No battle, no mantra, no escape, just observation, pure and simple. The mind won't like this approach. It prefers control to clarity. It will insist that understanding the cause is necessary for freedom. But understanding is a secondary movement. It happens after the wave has already passed. What truly dissolves fear is the raw act of witnessing, without urgency, without narrative. You become the still mirror in which fear sees itself and recognizes its own impermanence. Every time you resist fear, you build another wall inside the psyche. Every time you allow it to move through, a wall crumbles. The walls were never protecting you. They were keeping life out. Dissolution means letting the movement complete itself, trusting that what you truly are cannot be harmed by what you feel. This shift changes your internal gravity. The old reflex, to flinch, tighten, retreat, loses its authority. You begin to sense that awareness doesn't need protection because it was never in danger. The sensations may still surge, but they move through a larger space now, a space no longer defined by resistance. You start to live from that spaciousness rather than from the contraction. Imagine standing in front of a storm. The rain falls, the wind howls, but instead of hiding, you open your arms. You feel everything, the cold, the wet, the noise, but something deeper remains calm, even curious. That something is not fragile. It's the part of you that has been quietly waiting for your attention. It doesn't need the storm to stop to feel safe. It knows safety as its own nature. Seeing fear without becoming it is the final unmasking. You no longer search for courage, you become transparency itself. The emotion may arise, but there's no one left inside to claim it. That absence of ownership is liberation. You haven't conquered fear, you've stopped feeding it your name. And this realization asks to be anchored, made visible through your own intention. So before you leave this reflection, write in the comments, not as performance but as a simple act of recognition. I see fear, and I am the one who sees. Let it be your quiet proof that awareness has taken its rightful place at the center. Those 7 words mark the moment fear lost its hold, not because it vanished, but because you finally stopped mistaking it for yourself. Something extraordinary happens after the storm of fear dissolves. Silence begins to rearrange your inner architecture. Not the silence of absence, but the silence that hums beneath all motion, the kind that doesn't suppress emotion but gives it space to breathe. This silence is not passive, it's creative, reweaving your perception into coherence. Serenity is not a mood, it's a new frequency of intelligence, a different way your system processes existence. The first sign of reorganization is subtle. You no longer anticipate disaster. You wake and your body feels unhurried, as though it finally trusts time. The nervous system, once addicted to scanning for threat, starts to reorient around neutrality. Life hasn't changed dramatically, yet everything feels more spacious, more possible. It's as if the entire field of experience has expanded, and you can now sense the texture of each moment instead of bracing against it. Serenity is not the absence of movement, it's the synchronization of it. In survival mode, every part of you operates on different frequencies. Mind racing, breath shallow, body contracting, heart closed. Once awareness has seen through fear, those dissonant fragments begin to harmonize. Thought slows to the rhythm of breath, breath syncs to the pulse, and the pulse aligns with presence. Coherence emerges. This coherence is the body's way of saying, I remember who I am. When serenity becomes the new frequency, the mind stops trying to negotiate safety. It no longer rehearses outcomes or bargains with uncertainty. Instead, it begins to trust direct perception. You walk into situations that once triggered anxiety, and nothing constricts. The same stimuli appear, but the resonance has changed. You are tuned differently, and reality responds to that tuning. It's not mystical, it's mechanical. The field of observation dictates the field of manifestation. What you are coherent with, you experience. This reorganization touches everything: relationships, creativity, decision-making. You begin to notice how much noise was masquerading as effort. You used to equate tension with importance, busyness with meaning. Now, you act from clarity rather than compulsion. There's less doing but more impact. Actions arise naturally, as extensions of equilibrium, not reactions to threat. This is what ancient mystics called effortless action, not because nothing is done, but because nothing resists being done. Even the body begins to speak a different language. Muscles release old stories. Breath expands into areas that had been held for decades. Sleep deepens, vision sharpens. You start feeling the difference between energy that depletes and energy that renews. The nervous system, once trained to protect, learns to participate. It doesn't guard life anymore. It dances with it. From this state, you perceive fear itself differently. It no longer feels like an interruption to peace, but a ripple within it. When fear arises now, you don't collapse into it. You notice it move across the surface, a brief reminder of what coherence has healed. Serenity doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means feelings can move freely through a field too vast to be disturbed. In this reorganized awareness, intuition replaces anticipation. You no longer think your way forward. You sense your way. Decisions arrive as impulses that feel undeniably right, even without proof. Doubt still visits, but it no longer dictates. You trust the quiet intelligence of stillness more than the noise of speculation. This trust isn't blind, it's empirical. You've tested it. Each time you followed that calm impulse, life aligned more elegantly than your plans ever could. The most profound shift, though, is relational. You begin to meet others without the hidden agenda of needing them to stabilize your state. Love becomes generous again, without ownership, without defense. You listen without preparing replies. You speak from what is real now, not from the residues of what once hurt. Your presence itself becomes medicine, not because you try to heal, but because your coherence invites others to remember their own. As serenity integrates, your perception of time changes. Urgency dissolves. You move through hours not as steps toward a goal, but as waves within a continuum. Each moment becomes complete, neither a bridge nor a burden. The ordinary turns luminous. A glass of water, a passing breeze, the rhythm of footsteps, everything carries a kind of soft authority, reminding you that existence is already whole. This is not a static piece, it's alive, self-renewing. It adapts to chaos without losing its center. It feels like being inside music that never ends. Each event, each breath, each thought, contributing to the symphony without ever overpowering it. Serenity doesn't isolate you from the world, it connects you more deeply to it. You become an instrument of coherence within a collective field that has long forgotten its tune. And so, the reorganization is not an achievement, it's a return to the natural intelligence that was always guiding you beneath the noise. The journey through fear was never a detour, it was the recalibration required to remember the frequency of wholeness. What remains now is simple, to live in rhythm with that remembrance, to let serenity compose your reality note by note, until even silence sounds like home. The moment awareness becomes steady, fear loses its script. It no longer commands thought, body, or breath. What once felt like threat now reveals itself as unintegrated energy, asking to return to coherence. You begin to see that life was never against you. It was only mirroring the lens through which you watched it. When consciousness observes without defense, reality reorganizes itself into clarity. That is the quiet victory. Not escape, but vision restored. If this reflection reached you, like the video and write "I choose to see clearly" in the comments, so I know you arrived here. And if this space resonates, subscribe to receive more journeys like this one, each a step deeper into the art of conscious observation.